Hello and welcome to Equity TechCrunch's podcast about the business of startups. Today is Friday, October 10th, and I'm Kirsten Korosec, transportation editor here at TechCrunch, and I'm joined by weekend editor Anthony Ha and new little swap out, senior reporter Sean O'Kane. Welcome, you guys. And Anthony, I have a question for you. I've always thought about waffles as a breakfast food. But it's something more now, isn't it?
It is. It's become a pretty big symbol on Blue Sky. And I mean, this is something I wrote about over the weekend, partly because I was just seeing it and kind of mystified about it. And I'm not going to go into all the details because that would take like 30 minutes or more. But the gist of it is that, Jay Graber, the CEO of Blue Sky, did a post about waffles, kind of a joking post, but also about kind of just the social dynamics on Blue Sky. And then somebody asked her, hey, have you banned this user Jesse Single yet? Which is like a whole kind of thing on Blue Sky. To which she responded waffles. And then things kind of spiraled from there to the point where people were kind of attacking her on Blue Sky. And then she was kind of responding in a pretty combative way. Like at one point she was suggesting that they go on a poster strike, then start posting about, the miracle of decentralization. You can all go start your own, alternative social network. So it was kind of a whole thing.
The gist of it is that this was a debate over people becoming asking about moderation and controls. And her response was really about, you're kind of making a bigger deal about anything, like someone getting upset over waffles, right?
Yeah, there's sort of two levels to it. One is, I think, specifically about this writer, Jesse Single, who I think has done a lot of writing about kind of skeptical about, trans rights and related issues. And a lot of users on Blue Sky don't think he should be there. Blue Sky is, especially in the early days, was really big with the trans community. So that's one of the discussions. I think there's a larger discussion about basically that Blue Sky is a place where some of the biggest users and the company executives really don't seem to like each other that much. I don't know if that's actually true, but that is just like a vibe you get when you see their posts about each other. And this seemed kind of like the most intense version of it. And then the way that waffles came in was, I should say that the initial post was her kind of quoting somebody else approvingly who said, Blue Sky is a place where you're like in Waffle House and somebody bursts in and says, what? So you hate pancakes? Like it's somebody coming in and like bringing up something completely unrelated in a really combative way.
Well, I'm offended. I know that because I'm pro waffle.
Yeah, I'm also pro waffle.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the Fediverse kind of decentralized because that is one of the topics on our show today. We're going to get into some deals with AltStore and a company called Base Power. And then we're going to shift over to catch up on all things Tesla. Sean's here for that. And then I'm going to talk about how enterprise and meets AI is quite the hot sector these days.
Right. So let's talk about AltStore, which is an alternative app store. It's, one of those ideas that has been floating around for a while, but has, gotten a lot of extra fuel recently because of the antitrust cases against Apple that basically allow or kind of force Apple to allow these alternative distribution methods. And so AltStore raised a $6 million round, which is not, a tremendous amount of money, at least not compared to some of the other dollar amounts we're going to be talking about, but is a sign that there are investors who think there is a serious business in alternative app stores. Have either of you actually checked this out or kind of explored the alternative app store universe?
No, nothing yet, but it's something I've been keeping a close eye on because I know that it feels like we're only barreling towards a world in which it is going to matter, which I think is probably reflected in the fact that they were able to raise some money.
I haven't used it, Anthony, but before we get too deep into it, I want to sort of back up and address the definition of Fediverse because we write a lot about it here. But I kind of was thinking about this because I was thinking about conversations that I've had with my parents when they would read something and be like, oh, Google Cloud, etc. And I'm like, well, what is it? And they literally couldn't define what the cloud is. My mom would just be like, it's the cloud. So Fediverse,
Well, let me just say, in defense of your mom, I think a lot of us use technical terms that if we were pressed, we could not offer a very precise definition of. I mean, maybe that's about to be me with the Fediverse, which I think is basically the sort of loose term for the idea of particularly like social media, like a whole kind of constellation of applications that are interoperable. You know, if you were on Twitter, let's say, and you had like this huge account on Twitter, but then you were not happy with the direction of Twitter, basically your only option was to just kind of shut it down, walk away, and that's, you know, you're just kind of done with it. And now there's this idea, oh, well, maybe you could actually like, you know, these different systems could play more nicely with each other, and you could post, you know, to multiple accounts on multiple networks. You could take your followers from one, you know, application to another. I think that, I mean, in truth, the reason it feels very abstract is because I think these integrations, when they exist now, are pretty clunky. You don't really see a lot of people actually doing that with their social media accounts. But, you know, when we talk about things like Threads and Blue Sky and Mastodon, that's what they're supposed to be able to support, even if I don't think that reality is really there, at least for most day-to-day users. And then to your question about, I guess people are wondering, how does this apply to AltStore? I was wondering the same thing, but they did announce that essentially, you know, with this funding round, one of the things they want to do is build more integration with the Fediverse, like the idea that essentially, you know, if you have an app on AltStore and then you're like pushing updates to it, then there could just be automatic posts to Mastodon about that. You know, people could sort of follow their favorite apps, which I think is kind of interesting. But also, if you're trying to build a popular app, I imagine you have a social media presence already. So I'm not sure that this kind of automation is going to be a huge game changer. I mean, I could be totally wrong. I do think that probably people who are very excited about the Fediverse and very excited about alternative app stores, there's probably a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram, but it still feels like probably not a huge game changer.
But, you know, I think it is, to your point, like pretty niche. It also seems like we're going to see more of this as a result of regulatory changes in Europe specifically. And also people who are, you know, attracted to being able to access apps that maybe Apple wouldn't normally put on. Like, so adult apps, for instance, is one of the things that the Alt Store is doing, but other ones too that have generally been sort of unavailable on the traditional like big tech Apple App Store or Google App Store.
Yeah, and I think also that there's a consumer, you know, drive of just like, hey, there may be apps that you're not going to be able to find in the traditional app store, you know, in some of these other categories that you're mentioning. I think that then there's also push on the developer side that, you know, again, a big case was, you know, the Epic Games case, and that's part of what pushed Apple in this direction. And Epic Games is like, we don't want to be paying Apple all this money that, you know, the 30% that Apple wants to get through the App Store. And so I think you may also just see developers doing more to promote, either to list exclusively on these other app stores or to promote listings other than their Apple listing, because they'll actually get to keep more of the revenue from, you know, apps distributed that way.
Yeah. I'm going to move on though to Base Power. And this is an interesting company to me and a very, very different level of funding. $1 billion, not $6 million. And this is a company that on its face doesn't seem particularly, you know, let's say innovative. I mean, it is. But when you first look at it, it's essentially an energy storage business. They sell a unit to businesses and residences that is similar, let's say, to a Tesla Powerwall, but like double or triple the size of the power. So the claim here is that it can generate power for your home if you are, you know, offline, if there's a blackout or for other reasons, for up to 48 hours. And the fascinating thing to me, Sean, I don't know if you follow this company at all, but it only was founded 2 years ago. And it's like one of the bigger providers in Texas now in terms of energy storage business.
Yeah, and they're raising money at a really rapid clip. I mean, they only just closed their Series B in April of this year, I think, and that was about 200 million. So this being such a quick Series C to follow, and one that, if I'm not mistaken, was even larger than they had been targeting. It's a really interesting thing to see happen at a time when clean energy in general, and in whatever you want to throw under that umbrella, is essentially under attack from the current administration. I mean, we're seeing grants and loans and all sorts of appropriated money get cut down left and right across solar projects, wind projects. We've seen legal interventions that have been very hit or miss. Some projects are able to move forward, some not. But there's definitely a lot of headwinds against projects like this and companies like this. And so to see that there's still so much investor interest in making something like this happen that, like you said, is a relatively simple idea. And so I think we have an element here of, the cost of doing this and the cost of capital are just lining up right in a way that makes a lot of sense for base power, I guess. And it's happening in Texas, which is a huge market for a solution like this. It just all seems to be working out really well. And, that Texas piece of it, I think, is really important. And obviously, these guys founded this in Austin and they're deploying in Texas. And that has been just a real ground zero for this kind of battery supplement to the energy grid. And it's working. Battery and solar and wind all together are doing an amazing job helping out what has been a historically and especially recently really stressed power grid. And I believe this summer was the first time in the last few years, certainly this was not the case when I lived there a few years ago. This summer was the first time that there were not nearly as many warnings to, the power customers throughout the state to back down their AC use and watch their power usage in general. That was, for years now, that was kind of a constant call throughout the hottest months, asking people to essentially make sure that the grid didn't shut down completely. And so seeing a solution like this get started there, I think is a really interesting. It sets up a really interesting moment. And I'm curious where these guys are going to take this next.
This is like a market I really don't know a lot about. So maybe you could also just kind of contextualize this a little bit for me in terms of, Sean was already talking about the fact that seems like something that's already working. Like how widespread is the adoption? Is this a space where there's a lot of competition from other companies?
So energy storage has existed for quite a long time. And in terms of like brand recognition, I would say, well, there have been like the Generac type stuff, which is a very different thing. But in terms of like storing energy, either produced from solar or capturing electricity from the grid, and then being able to then bring that power back into your home, probably Tesla has one of the better brand recognitions among consumers. What base power is doing here that I think is really interesting is that typically these are very expensive units. These are luxury items or investments that people make because they are on such a wonky grid. They're leasing. Base power is set it up as a lease. So all of a sudden it opens up this whole new group of consumers that just didn't have the upfront cash. And it's reminiscent to me of what happened with solar many, many years ago when I was covering clean tech, which was that people just didn't have the money to, pay up front for all these solar panels and the installation. In Solar City, which, as most of us know, I think, was later gobbled up by Tesla and was founded by the cousins of Elon Musk. But they really kind of opened up a whole new adoption rate for solar because they leased, and others followed that as well. So this is, to me, what is really unique about it, because it just opens it up to so many more consumers. Sean, I don't know if there's anything else like that springs to mind what you're doing. I mean, we do know that they have a very good marketing team because they had like somewhat of a viral, I guess, ad campaign yesterday.
Yeah, they launched the news of their Series C with this kind of clever interactive video, I guess I would call it, where it was sort of shot from a top down onto a table of, a mock-up of a newspaper that was being opened, and you could scroll through and read all about the people who had invested and kind of what the general plans are for base power. So they're taking a pretty good approach from all different angles and setting up this company. They're putting this money to good use in sort of not only deploying the technology, but also winning people over with sort of the marketing and how they're framing it all. And yeah, I think that pricing idea and going through the lease model, it's really compelling to a lot of customers because, like you said, it not only drops that upfront cost, but it makes it a little easier to imagine the savings that you'll get over time. It's a better balance, I think, for a lot of customers who don't want to maybe have to feel like they need to stay in that house with that system for 20 or 30 years before they start seeing returns on it. And, I think a long time ago when this model was really being pioneered, there were a lot of questions about liability and what happens if you sell the home and stuff like that. But we've had enough time in between kind of the boom of SolarCity and now to hammer out a lot of those issues. And so it's good to see that other companies are trying to take advantage of that kind of business model. And again, like there's only going to be a greater need for this kind of stuff. The idea of this country taking or marshaling the political will and just the general technological expertise to remake the grid itself and really work on the problems that are keeping energy from getting to where it needs to go in an efficient manner is kind of hard to imagine these days. It's been hard to imagine for a long time, but especially now. So, we wind up with solutions like this, which I think can be just as good as or at least the better solution in the near term than kind of fixing the root cause.
Yeah. And to your point, I think that with more strain on the power grid, I mean, there was a time when everyone was very worried about EVs. You remember those days where EVs were going to destabilize the grid. And the reality is the grid has needed a lot of infrastructure improvements and upgrades well beyond what a bunch of EVs plugging in are going to do. But the more recent phenomenon is the rise of data centers, and that is going to require changes to the grid and also rethinking how that power is. So you see companies like Redwood Materials creating that Redwood Energy business division that basically can take off-grid energy storage. You're seeing companies like Base Power kind of on the opposite end, like on the consumer end, helping with offload power, because people could technically use this not just for blackouts, but like to cycle in, cycle off during peak power periods. So you're seeing all these different solutions. I think we're going to see a lot more because of the pressure that's going to be on the grid from this rise. By the way, one of our themes, like AI and enterprise, that we're going to get to next. But before we do, I really want us to catch up on Tesla, because Sean's here. You've spent a lot of time, many years, just like myself, writing about Tesla, and a lot happened this week.
Yeah, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration this week opened an investigation into full self-driving. This is the second investigation that it's opened into it. Back in October of last year, the agency announced that it was looking into reports that it had received about crashes involving FSD in low visibility situations. So think fog or dust, things like that. This is a wider investigation. I would say that the agency has received more than 50 reports of crashes related to, or sorry, not crashes, but incidents where FSD has taken a Tesla vehicle either through a red light, maybe after stopping at a red light and then continuing on when it shouldn't, or across a yellow line into oncoming traffic, or making illegal turns in a non-turn lane, or going through a turn lane when it's not supposed to. All of those different kinds of things have been reported to NHTSA by not only consumers and owners of Tesla vehicles, but also through a few media reports, but also from Tesla itself. Companies that work on these kinds of technologies have to report incidents like these over a certain threshold to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration dating back a few years. And, what's really interesting to me about this investigation is that when Tesla submits those reports to NHTSA about these problems that its system runs into, unlike a lot of the other automakers that do these reports, Tesla redacts pretty much all the information about what exactly happened in each incident, which is frustrating, right? Like, we want to know how this technology that's being tested out on public roads is working, and we're unable to see that most of the time. And so this is our first look into what some of those most recent incidents happen to be about. And so NHTSA has opened this probe. They'll take their time in evaluating it. They say they're already kind of working with Tesla on some parts of it. This is what's known as a preliminary evaluation. It's going to last at least probably around 8 months. So it'll be a long time before we get any results from it. And when these kinds of investigations get opened by NHTSA, at the end of them, or at the end of that first period, we usually see either a backing off of it because it's been resolved, or we see some kind of escalation, potentially on the path to a recall. So, it's more scrutiny from the agency, which, by the way, saw a lot of its automated driving experts cut by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency earlier this year. So that this was even happening in the first place is a tiny bit surprising. And I'm also, not necessarily expecting the speediest investigation with the federal government shutdown right now. So I guess we'll see
you
where
might
it
be
goes.
surprised. You were already surprised once, so you
Yeah,
might be surprised.
fair.
And so you never know. You never know. The other Tesla news is this stripped down, cheaper Model 3 and Model Y. And, the TLDR here is that these are not new models. These are models that have been really stripped down, to say the least. So some of the comparisons, which Sean also wrote about this week, for instance, like there's no FM radio. There is not a glass roof, although it is actually still there. It's just been covered up. The idea here is to lower the price, and you get to about 10% lower than the previous one. So Anthony, I know you're not a car owner, but I have to ask you, like, just for the consumer perspective here, is something like that appealing to you? Is it low enough? Is it like a low enough cost to like trigger? And by the way, it's about $37,000.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely a question that I had as I was sort of reading through all the coverage, is that like it's not that big, like it's still a lot of money. I mean, I know that, again, I haven't bought a car in a very long time, so maybe the numbers just seem kind of big to me. But I think this is a serious, purchase, and it's not. The 10%, I think, is what you said, is essentially what the discount is. It doesn't seem like it's going to open it up to that many new people, right? Like it feels like you can say that it's cheaper, but it doesn't feel like a dramatic change. And the other thing is that I feel like it's a price tag where I would be grumpy about some of the things that are being cut. Like you might say, okay, well, like who spends that much time listening to FM radio at this point? Aren't we all just sort of like listening to playlists from our phones? And maybe that's true, but if I've spent $36,000 on my car and I can't listen to the radio, I feel like that would feel like a not great purchase to me. I mean, I don't know, like, but Kirsten, you
Right.
Are a car owner. Like, would you pay this much for a Tesla?
I'm a multiple car owner, and no, I wouldn't. To me, what's really interesting here is that there isn't autopilot in this vehicle, which has been standard in all of the company's vehicles. It does have what is described as traffic aware cruise control. That's when you have cruise control, and it will have a distance between the car ahead of it, so it'll slow and it's traffic aware. But it doesn't have the auto steer component, so it doesn't have autopilot. And so then all of a sudden you're looking at other automakers that have cheaper vehicles with better advanced driver assistance systems, or certainly on par with this stripped down version, but the vehicles are less expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should get some context in here too. This is coming out at the time when the federal tax credit's gone away. I would assume that Tesla was hoping that was going to still be around, and that would drag the price of this, especially the Model 3, which is the one that costs just a hair under $37,000. That would have put that with the tax credit under $30,000, a much easier sell to the public. But that doesn't exist anymore. That's bad for Tesla in some respects, but it remains to be seen how much of an impact it'll have, because other automakers now no longer have access to that tax credit as well. And so this will be one of the more affordable, both of them will be kind of some of the more affordable electric vehicle models. But we also have to remember, like, these cars only exist because, as far as we know, through reporting from other news outlets and through Musk's own biography written by Walter Isaacson, because Elon Musk killed an effort to build what was supposed to be a $25,000 car built on the next generation platform that they're developing the new sort of cybercab robotaxi on. And there has been a lot of reporting on the back and forth between these competing ideas of something that was completely new and ultra cheap based on radical new manufacturing methods, and this, which is ultimately just without a doubt a compromise of a set of products where it is the company taking out as much cost as possible. And I think the thing that I haven't seen discussed enough this week that I think is really important when we're talking about the price is that you listen to the executives at Tesla talk about price and making their cars affordable to as many people as possible. And Musk's big thing is talking about the monthly payment. He doesn't care about the MSRP. He cares about getting that monthly payment low. This price difference with the existing models already is small enough, especially when you consider that it doesn't have autopilot. So people who are looking for driver assistance need to pay extra per month to get FSD. is really not all that different monthly payment wise. And so what's the value here? Like it's such a head scratcher that some of the biggest supporters of Tesla on X, I've seen them spend much of the time this week saying that this is actually not meant to sell. It's only meant to be this kind of anchor pricing thing for the more affordable models, which if that's where they're at, I don't really know what the rest of us are supposed to expect from this. So, I guess we'll see where it goes. And the one thing we know for sure is that Tesla is trying to use these models to use up more of their capacity on their production lines in Texas because they have been underselling vehicles for the last year and a half. And so this is more of a business move than a consumer move.
Kirsten, you'd also mentioned that we're going to talk about AI and the enterprise, and that is a broad topic. There was a whole bunch of news this week related to that. Could you maybe just give us a quick rundown of what some of the headlines were?
So, first of all, I think the headline should be enterprise is super interesting these days. And enterprise kind of gets a bad rap because it's like, selling to businesses like enterprise software. But it is actually a really hot area right now, in part because a lot of AI startups and also big tech companies like Google are all trying to bring their AI tools into the workplace. So we had a series of deals this week. So we've got Anthropic. They made a partnership with IBM, and that one is interesting, but a little bit longer term. More important, I think, in terms of like headlines, and a little ironic too, is that Anthropic has a deal with Deloitte. Deloitte is going to be using Claude, I believe, in all of its employees. So that's about 500,000 people. The sort of funny little contradiction there is that as they're bringing in AI into their workplace, they also, on the same day, pretty much, the Australian government is forcing them to pay back a contract fee that they were given because a report that they gave the Australian government was so riddled with AI slop and made up citations that the footnotes piece wasn't usable. So that shows the challenges. And then just also Google relaunched. It's not a rebrand, although it can be a little confusing, but it's called Gemini Enterprise. And it's, if you want to think about it as like an AI toolkit, all about giving you the ability to build securely like different AI agents that might cover HR and finance and sales and marketing.
And I think this actually ties back to our discussion last week about, some of these Gen AI social networks. And we were kind of framing that as kind of potentially a way that these AI companies could eventually make money, which I definitely think is the case, but I think there's sort of a long road to get there. And, the enterprise, of course, is, for all that, sometimes people don't find it quite as interesting or sexy as consumer, is actually where the real money is. And so, maybe Sora is how OpenAI will make money 5 years from now, but this is how these companies are going to make money now. And, of course, the Deloitte one was especially striking. I mean, sometimes it can feel like a little bit of a broken record to just point out how these models don't always feel like they're totally ready for prime time. But I actually weirdly also find it encouraging that the Australian government actually pushed back and said, no, like you cannot do this. And that, it's not necessarily that I think no one should ever use AI in the creation of these kinds of reports, although I think you could make that argument. But if you're going to do it, like you actually have to be responsible for the outputs. You have to actually go through and make sure that the information being cited is real. You can't just like feed it into a model, prompt a model and just be like, all right, my job is done. That'll be however many billable hours. I think anyone who does that should be embarrassed and fined. And so I'm glad this is happening.
Yeah. Sean, enterprise software, maybe not on top of your list of things that you follow, but are you seeing, one of the things that was interesting this week that you might want to weigh on, and it kind of connects back to automakers. So Zendesk also had an announcement this week, and they're really creating these tools that are going to handle pretty much all of customer service. Are you starting to see that kind of creep in? Do you see a business there?
Yeah, I was going to say that I've actually written about it a few times. There are a bunch of different startups that are developing full sort of customer service suites, voice agents, LLMs for emails and text, for dealerships and service centers, which, I actually think that's a worthy idea because the problem there isn't we don't have enough people for the jobs to do to do this stuff, and it's going to take their jobs away. It's that you can never get somebody on the phone, or you get bounced around, especially going for service. You get bounced to the service department. Everybody's busy. So if you can capture it accurately and make it easier for people to get a response, the question there for me is, how much will those businesses adopt it and stick with it? There's been all sorts of technologies over the years, like web forms and things like that, where these dealerships have done it, but then they forget about it, and then it just sits on their website, and you think that it's going to work, and then it doesn't work because they just want you to call them. So I hope, I have some optimism and some hope that stuff like this is actually going to be people's first touch point with it, and it looks like we're about to find out.
One of the things that stuck out to me in the Zendesk announcement was this stat that they think it's ready for about 80% of use cases, which I immediately was suspicious of. But then Russell, our colleague who wrote the story, said there are sort of benchmarks that suggest that is, probably an achievable goal. But I think then what you have to think about is what happens in those other 20% of cases. Like, I mean, 80%, totally impressive. But if you're in that 20% and if the system is kind of falling down and you can't talk to a real human being and the AI is sort of messing that up, that is still going to be an incredibly frustrating experience. And so part of the test is not just how good is the AI, but how good is the whole system at determining when you should have an automated response and when you should still be able to get connected to a human being.
But I would say this. I mean, I just pulled up the article just to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that the remaining 20%, they also claim to have the ability to like create these side tools. But
Okay.
what isn't clear to me is, I'm not going to say it seems like an afterthought, but a little bit like, then why not just say 100%? Like, why split it up? It doesn't seem very clear. Like, why not just say 100%? But yeah, to your point, like, I do think that I also have maybe some optimism. I try not to be cynical with these things. I just know that right now, the way that the customer service, when you get bounced around to a million places and clearly they're experimenting with like AI agents, it can be a very frustrating experience. I do think that like you kind of figure out pretty quickly the products that are working and the products that aren't. So I have hope. I have hope for AI agents. We are all out of time though. And you can always find us at Equity Pod on X and Threads. And you can also find us next week when we come back. And I don't know if Sean's going to be here next week. Maybe Max will be back, but we'll see you then.